right, we will roll. All right, Director Pimentel?
Here.
Director Friel? Julie Peterson? Here. Jessica Dick? Anything else?
There, any changes to the agenda? Different from the materials we received. We appreciate the updates we got from the packet. And the packet was originally sent today. Any public matters not on the agenda?
Does it have anyone from the public?
All right. On to comments from committee members. Attitude as always. Part of the time of year. Move on to our first item is consent. Our minutes from October 24th, 2020. Happy to entertain a motion to consent item.
I'll make a motion.
Sorry.
Yes. Director Pimentel?
Yes.
Director Friel? Pearson? Yes. And Grace?
Discussion item is the financial performance for October 2023.
Okay. So, I'm going to step backwards and talk a little bit about the audit adjustments and kind of to help lay the landscape for the November financials, because with us not doing an October, and I'm going to talk a little bit about October and November, but they'll feel a little bit out of whack without kind of stepping back and walking forward. And part of the reason is we had presented the September financials prior to having the audit finalized, and then we had the late client entries into the audit. And as we went to put those entries in, they were making things look really confusing. So we decided which entries really should have been made back. Really, they truly should have been made in 2022. So which ones to put in September of 2023, and then which ones kind of were more applicable to this year. So I'll kind of talk through these, and I have some talking points in the slides. So one of the things that happened here is, and really a major item that was a late client entry, was the fact that the opening balance had brought forward the seller's losses on the prior company, and the auditors had determined we really should have just booked the acquisition value, not brought forward the seller's losses. And so the overall impact of that adjustment and the other adjustments, but we ended up with a $21 million extraordinary income below the line as it resulted from that the seller loss piece. The auditors had also done what they called a little bit more aggressive or conservative AR valuation, and they had come up with a much higher level valuation process than what we're typically used to. And so we made a decision to go back and revalue all of the accounts receivable the way they had done that. Just because we're still looking at our whole AR valuation process. We are going to kind of work our way back to the more detailed valuation process, but we wanted to understand what the auditor impact would be. As a result, we revalued it all the way back to September of 2022 and ended up booking an additional $7 million reduction in net revenue for 2022. It also really played havoc with the whole bad debt piece that you've seen us kind of struggling with this year, where we moved a lot of stuff that was still sitting in contractuals, down to bad debt. We ended up moving that picture, I can give you these slides too, yeah. We ended up moving those, that bad debt back into the September 2022 because it was really about very old accounts receivable that should have already been in the bad debt line. So the good news for 2023 is we don't see that big, it looks like $13 million in about July of this year. We don't see that anymore. On the expense side, the salary and wages, we ended up with almost $5 million in pickup. And there was various accruals, corrections, a review of how the incurred but not received medical expense valuation, pension liabilities. So there was a number of things that made up that $5 million, and that became favorable in the audit for 2020. And then the rest of the categories had some minor, they were very insignificant to the bottom line. But through all of this, we ended up with, $2.2 million EBITDA loss, $2.2 million more EBITDA loss in 2022 than what had originally been stated. I already talked about the last one. So the next slide kind of shows the picture of what I just said here. Really probably what's notable there is, the $7 million more in, or less in net revenue after the audit, so a lower percent collectible, and then the expenses being $4.8 million more favorable. So I do all of that to then kind of fast forward to and restate September of 23, because like I said, we kind of took the audit and tried to determine what really belonged in 22 versus 23. So, and it's really, the audit was up through, I should restate that, the audit was up through December of 22, so the adjustments from the audit that balanced to the financial statements are all in 22, but some of the things that came out of that and the way we book things that are 23, we restated. That's really what I'm trying to get at. So we ended up, as we moved all that bad debt back to 22, but we revalued using the auditor's model. We ended up increasing contractual allowances, offset by that bad debt movement. So we have a decrease in net revenue of $4.9 million. So expenses really didn't change that much, but what you see here, and the reason I want to show you this, is that the EBITDA line pre-audit was minus $3.4 million. Post-audit, or what I call post-audit, meaning the way we determine valuing, we put it at negative 8.3. And that's going to come into play as I show you October and November. So next slide. I don't spend a lot of time on October because most of the storyline comes out in November, but a couple of highlights from the October consolidated financials were, our volumes continued to be down. We really, almost all of the year, had lower volumes than we had projected. Because of the audit, one of the things that we learned was with the whole Packard loan, we received the cash last year, but we have to, after we make a repayment, we have to record that as revenue. So it's kind of a non-cash, other operating revenue transaction. So in October, we had made that payment in March, but in October, we took a $1.7 million pickup to net revenue for that Packard loan. We also have to do a little bit different accounting with the QOF provider tax. in terms of how we kind of plan for the accruals. So, we had an expense savings or a decrease in expenses, that, you know, really spans most of the year, but that hit in October and gave us a favorable, you know, $1.6 million favorability in other, expenses. So, what that means is we actually had a pickup of $1.8 million EBITDA in the month of October. But you're gonna see, as I show you November, that we basically go the other way, and so it's gonna net out with November. Look at November. So November, you can, I showed it, I only did a year to date. I'll start from the bottom and then work back up. So the November EBITDA is now at minus $8.3 million. So pretty much what I said. September we were around, you know, minus $8 million, with the revised numbers. We picked up 1.8 in October. We basically lost 1.8 in November, and so we're pretty much been in the same place the last 3 months. The part of the reason we had to change QAF and dish payments in November is that QAF 8 wasn't approved. It just recently became approved, but we haven't even gotten all the schedules yet of exactly what the payments are gonna be and when they're gonna be. Hopefully we'll have it by the time we close December, and I think it's early in January, but we're waiting on that from external sources. We had in November higher supply costs than usual, and primarily that was related to some higher cost drug usage, implant expense because we have had more surgery cases, and some higher lab and blood related expenses. You know, pretty much everything else was generally in line with where it has been. The next slide. So here's a quick look at volumes. Volumes were pretty consistent between the months, except for that deliveries were much higher in October and down in November at just 54. The volumes are all down to what we saw in November of 22, except for surgeries. Surgeries is kind of the one bright spot there, and we also had, you know, good surgeries in October. Case mix was up a little higher in October, down in November at 1.44, and, you know, we tend to kind of sit between 1.4 and 1.5. So, outpatient volumes also were down, and the most significant reduction we've seen in outpatient volumes in the non-ER stuff has been in radiology services. Had various staffing challenges across some of the different modalities, as well as some downtime from equipment issues. Good news is that we had a strong volume in outpatient surgeries with 122, which is really the highest month I think that we've had this year. The budget looks off, you know, because we had always anticipated that we would have had the cath lab open earlier than we did. So that's why we have such a disconnect to the budget there. But you know what, you can also still see, look at where we were in November of 22. We had 144 outpatient surgeries, although I think I questioned that number a couple times. Really an accurate number. I think I should take that back. Now that I think about it, I think we've questioned that. But I think the best news is that we're finally kind of picking up with the outpatient robotic surgeries, because I was getting worried there earlier in the year when we were doing less than 10 a month, and the last couple months have been good, and November of 21 was very good. All right, next slide. Wanted to go back and start putting in some of the detail about admissions, payer mix on both out to the patient side, because we haven't had too much of that in the last couple of months. And, you know, generally speaking, the gold bar in the middle, that's managed Medi-Cal, and, you know, primarily almost all Alliance. And so we were 41.6% Alliance in the month of November admissions, and it was at 37.6 in October. The commercial is the top blue up there near the top. So 13.9% in November, but it had been as high as 17.3% in October. And if you really look back to, you know, kind of July forward, we've had a bit of an improvement in our commercial mix as opposed to what it was like earlier in the year. And, you know, really where we've probably seen the most reduction, you know, to offset that has been in straight Medicare. And the next slide. So here's what it looks like on the outpatient side, about 43% Alliance and 24% commercial. Down a little bit in November is Medicare, but we usually average about 20% on the Medicare side. And, you know, self-pay has picked up a little bit. You know, we've been averaging 2.5 to 2.7 the last 4 or 5 months, you know, where we were closer to about 2% in the middle of the year. And we were high last December, but then it had kind of had evened off around 2% for a while, and it's only recently. That's my last slide on just straight finance. So it was kind of a challenging story to tell with all the audit movement, and I think we're all happy to have that behind us. There were things that we just kind of kept second-guessing ourselves with, but I think, you know, we're going to have the auditors back in here by February to do a full 2023 audit, you know, hopefully to be presenting it to the board by April at the latest, you know. And so I think that will truly be the validation that we've bucket.
The only modest question is more, for the audit adjustments, or before the audited financials were not corrections of the audited financials.
No.
They were done within the scope of the auditor signing off on it.
Yeah, these were, after the audited, these were the auditor's financial adjustments. And all the ones from the auditors were for 2022.
Correct.
So they were all booked within 2022, where the auditors said we had the ability to play us which month we booked them in. So that's why we looked at what should really go back to be booked in September, because it's like bringing over the seller's losses and some of that AR valuation stuff. You know, the seller's losses never should have come over. Part of the reason that we went to that extra level is we look at things on a rolling quarterly basis for the Santa Cruz County Bank loan. And so I wanted to try to keep October, November, December, that fourth quarter, kind of as clean as possible, because it's the bank loan, the line of credit asks for a rolling 4 quarters. So the first time we go to do that, which is also going to be in February, when we sit down with the guarantors and the bank, that quarter is going to be included. Where that really comes into play is the covenant that says, you know, on a rolling 4 quarters, you're not kind of shifting more than a 20% worried about loss. They'd probably stand up and applaud if it was a 20% improvement, you know, but we don't want to trigger that covenant. I honestly think that our guarantors and the bank, at that point, they have the option to just freeze the line of credit, and we really don't want them to do that since we need it. think that they would be more lenient, because we'd certainly be talking about what's the action plan to improve that. We're pretty much gonna be talking the same things whether we're making it or not, because we're always talking about how are we doing against our transition plans, our budget, and everything else. Yeah.
I believe no action is required, just,
Take a look. Anything in the explanation that you think could trip up the board that I could explain better? Kind of a confusing storyline.
I'm not sure the board needs audit adjustment. Final audit is done, I think this brings back to the discussion file.
No, it's done. It was approved in October. The board approved the audit.
Does that include these adjustments?
Yeah, because the audited financial statements that are in the audit packet were this was more of a storytelling of where we put it in the month. And maybe you're right, if that's more confusing, I could just actually skip that and just say we restated September. Just basically start with that slide, because that was really just to say September, after we made all these audit adjustments and determined which time periods things applied to. Some only applied to 22, some had a kind of a carry forward effect. That I wanted to point out, hey, in September we should have been telling you we had an $8.3 million negative EBITDA. In fact, maybe what I can do is and just kind of show restated September, October, November. I really wanted to see, we've been kind of hanging at that $8 million negative EBITDA. But that was kind of, if they remembered the $3 million, that was my thing. All right, so let me just do a in fact, our meeting minutes.
I know we brought it to this board,
Yeah, no,
maybe it's just my brain,
I was pretty sure, the meeting minutes from the last meeting, the October 24th. Yeah, reviewed and passed motion to accept the audit and forward to the district audit findings. Oh, yeah, which we did approve the audit findings at the board meeting. Okay, so then we will go on to the budget. So, starting with the top slide. So, one of the things, just to know about this budget is you're seeing, of course, summary level stuff, but this budget is for department level budget. As promised last year, we will have, individual department level budgets this year with manager accountability training, and, that will give us a lot more data to deal with in terms of variance analysis. So increase our ability to analyze the financials and not just do some month-over-month reviews. So starting at the top, we are budgeting $149 million in net operating revenue with about a 13% collectible patient revenue. 13% is still, I think, conservative, but given all of the movement we've had with our own AR valuation and our confidence level in it, I decided it was better to be conservative there and continue to work on our rev cycle cycle improvements as well as our valuation process. We do include in this, budget, we include new volumes such as the cath lab volume and improved robot volume. All of our existing volume, we analyzed and previously brought to the board, talking about what sort of increases we have on existing volume. And we do have a, charge master increase, booked into this budget. Next slide. On the expense side, we're budgeting, a slight EBITDA loss. It's about $366,000 EBITDA loss, because our expenses are slightly higher than the net revenue we've budgeted. And then when you look below the line and bring in the depreciation and the MPT lease and insurance, it's about a $6 million loss. As compared to where we're projecting this year at about a $7 million EBITDA loss. So I'm hoping, and this may actually be a little